I, 72, F, live in the house my husband, Arthur, and I bought 50 years ago. It is too big for one person, filled with the ghosts of laughter and the quiet weight of memory. Arthur passed away 6 months ago. The silence he left behind is a physical presence, a constant companion in these echoing rooms. He was a good man, a brave man. He served his country with a quiet dignity that defined his entire life. His war medals, kept in a velvet-lined rosewood box on the mantelpiece, were not trophies to him. They were reminders. Reminders of friends lost, of sacrifices made, of a time that shaped him into the person I loved for 5 decades. He promised them to me. Ellie, he'd said, his voice thin but clear in those last days. You keep these? They're a part of our story. My son, Mark, is a decent man, but he inherited his father's gentle nature without the steel spine that lay beneath it. He is married to Amelia. Amelia is different. She moves through the world as if it is a stage, and she is the star. Everything is about appearances, about status, about climbing a ladder I never even knew existed. She always treated Arthur's stories of the war as quaint, dusty relics of a bygone era, smiling politely while her eyes scanned the room for someone more important to talk to. Since Arthur's passing, Amelia has appointed herself the manager of my life. She calls it helping me downsize and simplify my affairs. It feels more like an invasion. She arrives unannounced, armed with packing boxes and a bright, false smile, steering me away from rooms she intends to organize. I found her in Arthur's study one afternoon, her phone out, taking pictures of his antique desk. Just getting an appraisal, Eleanor, she chirped, without a hint of shame. This old thing could be worth a fortune. We can put the money toward your future care. My future care was perfectly fine. Arthur had made sure of that. But to Amelia, every object was a price tag, every memory a commodity. The rosewood box was the first thing I looked for every morning, and the last thing I saw every night. It sat on the mantel, a dark, solid presence beneath a portrait of Arthur in his uniform. One Tuesday morning it was gone. My heart seized. I searched the study, my hands trembling. I looked in the dining room sideboard where we kept the good silver. I checked the drawers of his dresser, filled with the lingering scent of his cologne. Nothing. A cold dread, heavy and certain, settled in my stomach. I knew who had taken it, but I did not want to believe it. I called my son. Mark, have you seen your father's medals? The box is missing from the mantelpiece. There was a pause on the line, a beat of hesitation that was deeply familiar. Mom, are you sure? Maybe you moved it. I did not move it, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I have not touched it. Amelia was here yesterday, organizing the living room. Oh, he said, the sound small and weak. Well, I'm sure she put it somewhere safe. You know how she is, she wants everything tidy. She probably stored it away so it wouldn't get dusty. Mark, this is not some knick-knack, I said, the dread turning into a slow, hot anger. Those medals were your father's soul. They belong on the mantelpiece. I'll ask her, Mom, he promised, his tone meant to soothe but only succeeding in stoking my frustration. Don't worry. I'm sure there's a simple explanation. I hung up the phone, unconvinced. A simple explanation. With Amelia, nothing was ever simple. It was always a strategy, a move in a game only she was playing. I waited. I waited all day for Mark to call back with news that the box was safe in a closet, wrapped in tissue paper. The call never came. That night, I called Amelia directly. Amelia, I cannot find Arthur's medals, I said, keeping my voice as level as I could. Eleanor, honestly, she sighed, a gust of theatrical exasperation. We talked about this. Mark said you were worried. They are probably just misplaced. You have so much clutter in that house. I likely put them in one of the boxes I packed for storage. Which box? I asked. I have no idea, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. There are dozens of them. I was trying to do you a favor. I can't be expected to remember the placement of every little trinket. They are not trinkets, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. The line went silent for a moment. "Look, I'm very busy organizing the charity gala," she finally said, her tone shifting to one of immense self-importance. "I will look for them when I have a spare moment. You just need to be patient." She hung up before I could say another word. Patience. She wanted me to be patient while a piece of my husband, a piece of my own heart, was missing. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the dark living room, staring at the empty space on the mantel. The absence of the rosewood box was a wound, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it had not been misplaced. It had been taken. This was not about tidiness. This was about something else entirely, and I was going to find out what. The next few days were a blur of quiet panic. I searched every corner of my own home, hoping against hope that Amelia had been telling the truth. I opened boxes she had sealed, finding neatly packed photo albums and old books.
No me des.
I called Mark again. He was evasive. "Amelia said she'd look, Mom. She's just really swamped with this Gala thing. It's for a good cause." He was defending her as always. He was a buffer, a shield she used to deflect any and all responsibility. His loyalty was to his wife, not to his father's memory. The realization was another small, sharp cut. I felt utterly alone. The one person I would have turned to for strength, for righteous anger, was Arthur. I could almost hear his voice, calm and steady, telling me to think, to be strategic. Arthur was a military man, but his greatest victories were won with patience and careful planning, not with brute force. He never rushed into a fight. He gathered intelligence. He understood his enemy. And Amelia, I was beginning to understand, was my enemy. My best friend, Margaret, came over for tea on Friday. She saw the look on my face and knew instantly that something was wrong. "Eleanor, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I said, setting the teapot down with a clatter. "Arthur's medals are gone. Amelia took them." Margaret's expression hardened. She had never been a fan of Amelia. "Are you certain?" "She was here, helping," I said, making air quotes with my fingers. "And now they're gone." She claims she packed them away by mistake. Mark believes her. Or pretends to. "That woman wouldn't pack a box if there wasn't something in it for her," Margaret scoffed. "What do you think she's done with them?" "I don't know," I admitted, the uncertainty eating at me. "That's the worst part. Are they in a storage locker? Did she throw them away?" "It makes no sense." I felt a tear slide down my cheek and wiped it away angrily. I would not cry. Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. Margaret reached across the table and patted my hand. "We'll figure this out, Ellie. We will." That evening, Margaret sent me an email. The subject line was, "Thought you might find this interesting." There was no text in the body, just a link. My hand trembled as I clicked on it. It took me to the website of a prestigious local auction house, one that specialized in fine art, jewelry, and estate sales. The page was for an upcoming estates and heirlooms auction. I scrolled down through listings for diamond rings and antique furniture. And then I saw it. Lot 247, a distinguished collection of mid-20th century military medals. The photograph was professionally taken, the medals arranged beautifully on a black velvet background. But there was no mistaking them. The Distinguished Service Cross, gleaming under the studio lights. The Silver Star. The 2 Purple Hearts. And the unique way Arthur had mounted them himself, slightly off-center in the frame he had built. It was his. It was Arthur's legacy, displayed for sale to the highest bidder. I felt the air leave my lungs. My vision swam. It was worse than I could have imagined. She hadn't stored them. She hadn't thrown them away. She had stolen them to sell them. The description was deliberately vague, consigned from a private local estate. Private. Local. My blood ran cold. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, it felt like a physical blow. She had taken the symbols of his bravery, his pain, his honor, and put a price tag on them. I scrolled down the page, my mind numb. The auction was in 2 weeks. The starting bid was already set at a shocking $5,000. The estimated value was listed as $10,000 to $15,000. To me, they were priceless. To her, they were a down payment on a new car or a way to fund her lavish lifestyle. I thought of her voice on the phone, dripping with annoyance. "I'm very busy organizing the charity gala." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. This was how she was funding it. She was selling my husband's honor to buy herself social standing. The shock began to recede, replaced by a feeling I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was a cold, clear, diamond-hard rage. Amelia had mistaken my grief for weakness. She had mistaken my age for irrelevance. She had mistaken my quiet dignity for passivity. She was about to find out how wrong she was. I closed the laptop. I walked to the mantelpiece and stared at the empty space where the rosewood box used to be. I made a promise to my husband, a silent vow in the quiet of our home. I would get them back. But I would not just get them back. I would make her pay, not with money, but with the one thing she valued more than anything else in the world, her reputation. She wanted to sell my husband's honor. Fine. I would use it to buy back my own. The war was not over. It had just begun. My first move had to be careful. I needed confirmation, undeniable proof that linked Amelia to the auction. Calling her or Mark would be pointless. They would just lie, deny, and gaslight me further. I needed to go around them. I needed to talk to the auction house. Arthur always said, "Know your terrain." The auction house was now my terrain. The next morning, I put on my nicest tweed blazer and a string of pearls. I looked the part of a wealthy widow with an interest in military history. I called the auction house and asked to speak with the specialist in charge of the estates and heirlooms auction. A polite man named Mr. Davies came on the line. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm and cultured. "I'm calling about lot 247 in your upcoming auction. The collection of military medals." "Ah, yes," he said. "A truly remarkable set. One of the finest we've seen in years. Are you interested in placing a bid?" "I might be," I said carefully. "But first, I have a few questions about their provenance." The listing is quite vague. It simply says, "From a private local estate, for a collection of this significance, a potential buyer would want to know more about its history." This was a calculated move. Serious collectors value the story behind an item as much as the item itself. There was a slight pause. "I understand completely," Mr. Davies said smoothly. "However, our consignors often prefer to remain anonymous. I can tell you that they belong to a decorated local hero and were consigned by his family." His family. The word twisted in my gut. Amelia was not his family. She was a parasite who had attached herself to it. "I see," I said. "And the family's name? Would it be possible to know that? It would add significant value for me as a collector." "I'm afraid I cannot disclose that information without the consignor's permission," he said, polite but firm. "Our client confidentiality is paramount." I had expected that. I switched tactics. "I understand. Perhaps you could tell me this. The consignor, would it be Mrs. M. Thompson?" I threw Mark's initial and last name out there as a probe. I needed to see if he would react. There was another, longer pause. I could hear the faint sound of keyboard clicks. "I can confirm that the surname of the consignor is Thompson," he said, his voice meticulously neutral. "I am not at liberty to confirm the first initial." It was enough. It was the confirmation I needed. The odds of another Thompson family consigning an identical set of medals in the same city at the same time were astronomical. Amelia had used their shared last name to give herself a veneer of legitimacy. She was hiding behind my son. I ended the call, thanking Mr. Davies for his time. My mind was racing. She had used Mark's family name. Did he know? Was he a willing participant in this desecration? Or was he a fool, blinded by his wife's ambition? I had to find out. The answer would determine my next move. I steeled myself and dialed my son's number. It was time to stop being gentle. It was time for a direct confrontation. "Hi, Mom," he answered, his voice wary. He was expecting my call. "Mark," I said, my tone leaving no room for pleasantries. "I know where your father's medals are." "Oh," he said, a pathetic attempt at surprise in his voice. "That's great. Where were they?" Did Amelia find them? They are at the Harrison auction house, I said flatly. They are listed as Lot 247 in the Estates and Heirlooms auction in 2 weeks. They are being sold. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear his shallow breathing. He was caught. Mom, that can't be right, he finally stammered. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake, I said, my voice like ice. I have seen the listing. I have seen the photograph. I have spoken to the auction house. They were consigned by a Mrs. Thompson. Your wife, Mark, has stolen your father's metals and is selling them. No, he said, his voice cracking. No, she wouldn't. Amelia, she said you two had an agreement. She said you wanted to get rid of some of the old clutter, that you wanted her to handle it because it was too painful for you. She said she was having some things appraised. Appraised? I repeated, the word tasting like poison. She told you she was having them appraised? And you believed her? Did you think an auction house was a museum? They don't appraise things for fun, Mark. They appraise them to sell them. She said it was just to know the value. For insurance purposes, he floundered, his excuses becoming more and more desperate. She said she was going to bring them right back. Then why are they in the auction catalog, with a starting bid of $5,000? I shot back. Why is their sale scheduled for 2 weeks from now? Did she mention that part? I didn't know, he whispered. Mom, I swear, I didn't know she was going to sell them. I believed him. Not because he was a good liar, but because he was a weak man. Amelia had likely fed him a story she knew he would want to believe, a story that required no action from him, no confrontation. He had willingly put his head in the sand because it was easier than facing his wife. Whether you knew or not is almost irrelevant at this point, I said, my disappointment a heavy weight in my chest. The fact is, it has been done, and you did nothing to stop it. You let her walk into my house and take the most valuable thing your father owned. I'll fix it, Mom, he said, a note of panic in his voice. I'll talk to her. I'll make her withdraw them from the auction. I'll get them back for you. I promise. Will you, Mark? I asked, my voice devoid of hope. Will you really stand up to her? Or will she feed you another lie that you will choose to swallow because it's easier? I will, he insisted. I'll call you back tonight. I'll sort this out. I hung up the phone. I did not feel relief. I felt a profound sadness for my son, a man so thoroughly controlled by his wife that he had become a stranger to me. I did not believe for a second that he could fix this. Amelia had him on a leash, and she held it tight. His promise was just another empty gesture, another attempt to avoid the ugliness of the truth. But I had the truth now, and I knew what I had to do. I would not wait for my son to rescue his father's honor. I would do it myself. The call from Mark did not come that night. It came the next afternoon. His voice was strained, defeated. Mom, he began, I spoke with Amelia. I waited, saying nothing. It's a misunderstanding, he said, the words sounding rehearsed and hollow. She was just trying to help. She says the auction house made a mistake. They weren't supposed to be listed for sale, just for appraisal and insurance valuation. She's already called them to sort it out. She's very upset that they got it wrong. I closed my eyes. The lie was so audacious, so insulting to my intelligence, that I almost laughed. She was not even trying to be creative. This was her story, and she was forcing my son to parrot it. A mistake, I said, my voice dangerously soft. The auction house created a full online listing with professional photographs, a detailed description, a starting bid, and an auction date by mistake. They're taking the listing down, he said quickly, ignoring my question. She's handling it. The metals are safe. She's going to pick them up tomorrow. Is she now? I replied. And I'm supposed to believe that. Mom, please, he begged. Just let her handle it. She feels terrible about the mix-up. She was trying to do something good for the gala, you know? Raise some money for charity. She thought maybe a collector would pay for an appraisal, and that money could be donated. It all got confused. The mention of the gala again. My theory had been correct. But the new lie, that the appraisal fee would be the donation, was even more pathetic than the first. She was scrambling, trying to create a narrative that painted her as a well-intentioned victim of circumstance. "So let me get this straight," I said, spelling it out for him, forcing him to hear the absurdity of it all. "Your wife took your father's medals from my home without my permission. She gave them to an auction house. They were listed for sale. And now you are telling me it was all a charitable misunderstanding." "It sounds bad when you say it like that," he mumbled. "It is bad, Mark," I said. "It is a betrayal. Of me and of your father." "She's going to get them back," he repeated, his voice pleading. "Just give her a chance to make it right." I knew then, with absolute certainty, that he was lost to me in this fight. He had made his choice. He had chosen his wife's flimsy lies over his father's legacy. He had chosen the path of least resistance. "Fine, Mark," I said, and the coldness in my own voice surprised me. "Let's see if she makes it right. I will wait." But my patience is not infinite. I hung up the phone. I felt no anger toward my son anymore, only a deep, bottomless pity. He was a casualty in a war he refused to admit was happening. I immediately went back to the auction house website. The listing for Lot 247 was still there. It had not been taken down. Of course it hadn't. Amelia's story was a complete fabrication designed to buy her time, to placate her husband and get me off her back. She had no intention of withdrawing the medals. The sale was going to proceed. This was the final piece of evidence I needed.
My son would not help me.
My daughter-in-law was actively working against me, lying to my face through my own child. I was on my own, and that was perfectly fine. In some ways it was better. It made things simpler. There were no more allegiances to consider, no more feelings to spare. There was only the objective. My resolve hardened from anger into something colder and more practical. I opened a new browser tab and began to do some research. I looked up the charity Amelia was so passionately supporting. It was a local arts foundation, known for its high society galas and wealthy patrons. The Gala committee was a who's who of the city's elite. The chair of the committee, I noted with a grim smile, was Amelia Thompson. Her photo was on the website, a professionally shot image of her smiling, dripping with jewelry. The caption underneath boasted that under her leadership, this year's gala was projected to be the most successful fundraising event in the foundation's history. I found an article in a local society magazine promoting the event. It quoted Amelia extensively. "We are just thrilled with the community's support," she gushed in the article. "We've even secured a major anonymous donation that has allowed us to elevate the entire evening. It's going to be a night to remember." A major anonymous donation. My money. The money she expected to make from selling Arthur's honor. The audacity of it all was breathtaking. She was not just selling the medals, she was pre-spending the money, using the promise of it to build her own social capital. She was laundering her theft through philanthropy. A plan began to form in my mind, a strategy worthy of Arthur himself. It was a risky plan, one that would require courage and a significant amount of my own money. But the thought of Amelia, preening and taking credit for a donation funded by her deceit, was all the motivation I needed. She wanted a night to remember. Oh, I would give her one. I spent the next few days preparing for battle.
First, I went to my bank.
I met with the manager, a kind man who had known Arthur for years. I explained that I needed to make a significant sum of money liquid for a potential major purchase. He was discreet and helpful, arranging the transfer from my investment accounts to my checking account. I did not tell him what the purchase was. I did not need to. The grim determination on my face was enough. Next, I went back to the auction house website and registered as a bidder. The process was simple, requiring a credit card for verification. I created a username that was anonymous, untraceable to me. I was now a ghost in their system, a silent observer waiting for the right moment to strike. I checked the listing for Lot 247 every single day. It remained active. Amelia's lies had been fully exposed. She had never called them. She had never intended to stop the sale. I spent one long, sleepless night in Arthur's study. I pulled out his old photo albums, the ones Amelia had so neatly packed away. I looked at pictures of him as a young man, his face fresh and unlined, his uniform crisp. I saw him with his platoon, a band of brothers smiling for the camera, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. I saw him pinning a medal on a fellow soldier. I saw him receiving one himself, his expression humble and solemn. These were not just objects. They were the physical embodiment of his character. Each medal represented a moment where he had faced fear and chosen duty, a moment where he had put others before himself. The purple hearts represented the blood he had shed, the pieces of himself he had left on foreign soil. To sell them was to say that none of it mattered. It was to erase the man he was. My grief, which had been a dull, constant ache for months, sharpened into a pinpoint of fury. This was not just about a box of medals anymore. This was about defending a life. It was about honor. It was about the promise I had made to him in the final days of his life. "You keep these," he had said. And I would. No matter the cost. I started to think about the gala. If my plan worked, I would be in possession of the medals before the event. The auction was scheduled to end the Thursday before the Saturday gala. It would be tight but possible. I went to the charity's website and bought a single ticket to the gala. The price was obscene, but I paid it without flinching. I considered it an investment, an entry fee to the theater where the final act of this drama would play out. I then went to my closet. I pushed past the sensible cardigans and comfortable dresses I had worn for years. In the very back, preserved in a garment bag, was a simple, elegant, floor-length black dress. It was made of a heavy silk that fell in a clean line. I had worn it only a few times to formal military balls with Arthur. It was a dress of quiet dignity and strength. It would be perfect. It would be my armor. The plan was set. The pieces were in place. I had the money. I had the means. I had the will. All that was left was to wait for the auction to begin. The waiting was the hardest part. It was a week of quiet tension, of checking the website, of steeling my nerves. Amelia and Mark left me alone, assuming their flimsy lies had worked, assuming I had retreated back into my grief-stricken silence. They had no idea. I was not retreating. I was advancing. I was preparing to take back the ground they had stolen from me. The day of the auction arrived. It was an online-only auction, with bidding open for a full 24 hours. Lot 247 was scheduled to go live at 10 in the morning. I sat at Arthur's desk in his study, my laptop open, a fresh pot of coffee by my side. Margaret was on the phone, a steady, reassuring voice in my ear. "Are you ready for this, Ellie?" she asked. "I am," I said, my voice more confident than I felt. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I have to do this, Mags. For Arthur." "You do," she said. "And I'm right here with you. Every step of the way." At 10 o'clock sharp, the bidding on Lot 247 opened. The starting bid was $5,000. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The screen was static. I held my breath. Then, a bid appeared. $5,000. Another followed almost immediately. $5,500. "Here we go," Margaret whispered. I had set a budget in my mind, a generous one based on the auction house's high-end estimate of $15,000. But I also had a secret absolute limit, a number I would not go past. It was the entirety of the money I had moved into my checking account. It was a sum that made me feel slightly sick to contemplate, but I knew I would spend every last penny if I had to. My strategy, devised with Arthur's tactical mind in my thoughts, was to wait. I would not enter the fray early. I would let the other bidders fight it out, drive the price up, and reveal themselves. I would watch and learn. The bidding was brisk through the morning. It climbed steadily, in increments of $500, $6,000, $7,000,
$8,000.
It paused at $9,500. "It's slowing down," I murmured to Margaret. "Maybe you'll get them for a reasonable price after all," she said hopefully. But then a new bidder entered. Their bid was aggressive, jumping straight to $11,000. The other bidder immediately countered with $11,500. A bidding war had begun. For the next hour, they went back and forth, driving the price up past the $15,000 estimate.
16.
17.
18,000 dollars.
My stomach churned. This was more than I had anticipated. Who was this other bidder? A passionate collector?
A museum?
Or was it someone Amelia had arranged to bid to ensure the price reached a certain level? I could know. I could only watch as the number climbed higher and higher. At $19,000, one of the bidders dropped out. The aggressive bidder was now in the lead. I decided it was time to make my move. My hands were shaking as I typed my bid into the box.
20,000 dollars.
A round, solid number. I clicked the confirm bid button. My screen refreshed. You are the high bidder. I'm in, I told Margaret, my voice a croak. The counterbid came less than a minute later. 20,500. I immediately bid 21,000. They came back with 21,500. This was not a collector. This was a battle of wills. We went back and forth for what felt like an eternity. 22, 23, $25,000. The price was now astronomical, far beyond any reasonable valuation. This was about possession. Ellie, this is getting crazy, Margaret said, her voice tight with worry. Are you sure about this? I'm sure, I said, my focus narrowed to the screen. I thought of Amelia's smug face, her talk of a major anonymous donation. Every dollar I spent was a dollar she would not get to parade as her own triumph. It was my money buying back what was mine. The irony was savage. The bidding reached $29,500. My opponent's bid. My heart hammered. My absolute limit was $30,000. I had one more bid in me. One final shot. I typed in the number.
30,000 dollars.
I took a deep breath and clicked confirm. The screen refreshed. You are the high bidder. I watched the clock on the website. Bidding for the lot would close at 10 o'clock that evening. There were still hours to go. But the counterbid did not come. A minute passed. Then 5. Then 10. My opponent had finally reached their limit. The screen remained unchanged. The rest of the day was agony. I could not leave the computer. I watched the clock tick down, minute by agonizing minute, expecting to be outbid at any second. But the bid held. 20 minutes left.
10, 5.
1 minute left. My breath was caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, my hands clenched into fists. 30 seconds. 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The screen flashed. Lots sold. I had won. I had actually won. A wave of relief, so powerful it left me dizzy, washed over me. I started to cry, not from sadness, but from sheer, unadulterated relief. I had them back. They were safe. I got them, Mags. I sobbed into the phone. I got them. Oh, Ellie, I knew you would, she said, her own voice thick with emotion. I am so proud of you. After I composed myself, I saw an email had already arrived from the auction house. It was a confirmation of my winning bid and an invoice for $30,000, plus the buyer's premium. The final total was staggering. But as I arranged the wire transfer from my bank, I did not feel regret. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. Amelia had wanted a major donation for her gala. Well, she had gotten one. It had come from me. The next morning, I received another email from Mr. Davies, arranging the collection of my purchase. I replied, asking if I could pick them up that afternoon. He readily agreed. Then I made my final move. I replied to his email one more time. Mr. Davies, I wrote, for my own insurance and records, as the new legal owner of this collection, I require the full name and contact information of the original consignor. Could you please provide that to me? It was a long shot. He had cited client confidentiality before. But now, the transaction was complete. I was the owner. I had certain rights. I held my breath as I waited for his response. It came less than an hour later. It was brief and professional. Of course, madam. The consignor of record for lot 247 was Mrs. Amelia Thompson, followed by her home address and phone number. I printed the email. I printed the invoice from the auction house, showing the final price of $30,000. I printed the confirmation of my wire transfer from my bank. I now had a complete paper trail. I had the motive, the gala. I had the crime, the theft and consignment. I had the proof, her name, right there in black and white. And soon, I would have the medals themselves. I drove to the auction house that afternoon. Mr. Davies greeted me personally. He led me to a private viewing room. There, on a velvet-lined tray, was the rosewood box. It was just as I remembered it. Solid, dark, and beautiful. "Would you like to inspect them?" he asked kindly. "Yes, please," I said. My hands were steady as I lifted the lid. The medals lay nestled in the velvet, gleaming. They were all there. The Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, the Purple Hearts. They were safe. I felt a lump form in my throat. I had brought them home. "They are magnificent," Mr. Davies said quietly, respecting my moment. "They were my husband's," I said, my voice thick. He was a hero. I looked up at him, and he saw the truth in my eyes. He saw the grief and the anger and the love. His professional demeanor softened into one of genuine compassion. "They're back where they belong then," he said. I took the box, holding it securely in my arms. I had paid an exorbitant price for what was already mine. I had spent a fortune to correct a monstrous wrong. But holding the weight of that box in my arms, I knew it was worth every single penny. The medals were home. And now, it was time to prepare for the gala. Amelia was expecting an anonymous donation. I was going to deliver it to her in person. The day of the gala arrived, a crisp Saturday in October. I spent the morning in quiet contemplation, holding the rosewood box in my lap, running my fingers over the smooth, familiar wood. I was not nervous. The anxiety of the auction had been replaced by a serene, unshakable calm. I knew my purpose. I was an instrument of my husband's memory, a defender of his honor. In the afternoon, I began to get ready. I laid out the black silk dress on my bed. It was a severe, simple garment, devoid of any lace or sequins or frivolous decoration. It was a dress that meant business. I did my hair myself, pinning it up in a simple, elegant chignon. My makeup was minimal. I wanted my face to be clear, my expression unhidden. Finally, it was time. I opened the rosewood box. I took out the framed set of medals. Arthur had mounted them on a dark blue velvet board, behind glass, inside a custom-made frame. But that was for display on a wall. It was not what I needed for tonight. I carefully removed the back of the frame. One by one, I gently unpinned each medal from the board. The Distinguished Service Cross, for extraordinary heroism. The Silver Star, for gallantry in action. The 2 Purple Hearts, for wounds received at the hands of the enemy. I held each one in my palm. They were heavier than they looked, dense with history and sacrifice. Using a set of military pinbacks I had ordered specially, I arranged the medals on the left side of my dress, directly over my heart. The way a soldier would. The way Arthur had. They hung in a proud, gleaming row against the stark black silk. When I was done, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I did not see a frail, grieving widow. I saw a woman wearing her husband's courage as her own. The effect was startling. It was not a fashion statement. It was a declaration. I gathered my clutch purse. Inside, I placed my ticket, my lipstick, and the folded printouts, the auction invoice, the bank transfer confirmation, and the email from Mr. Davies naming Amelia Thompson as the consignor. My evidence. I drove myself to the hotel, where the gala was being held. I handed my keys to the valet and walked toward the grand entrance, my back straight, my head held high. As I entered the glittering ballroom, a hush fell over the people nearest the door. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. People stared, their eyes drawn to the incongruous sight of military medals on an evening gown. I saw confusion, curiosity, and in the eyes of a few older gentlemen, a flicker of understanding and respect. I ignored them all. I scanned the room, a sea of glittering gowns and black tuxedos. And then I saw her. Amelia was holding court near the stage, the absolute center of attention. She was wearing a garish, sequined gold dress, laughing loudly at something one of the city councilmen said. She looked like a woman who had just won the lottery.
In a way, she thought she had.
I began to walk toward her, my steps measured and deliberate. The whispers followed me like a ripple spreading across a pond. People were making way for me, their curiosity piqued. As I got closer, I saw my son, Mark, standing beside her, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo, a glass of champagne dangling from his hand. Amelia turned, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Her eyes found me. For a moment, she simply stared, her brain trying to process what she was seeing. Her brilliant smile faltered, then collapsed entirely. Her face, which had been flushed with triumph, turned a pale, sickly white. The color drained from her cheeks, as if a plug had been pulled. She excused herself abruptly and rushed toward me, her expression a mask of fury. Mark trailed behind her, his face a mixture of confusion and dread. "Eleanor," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, trying to keep the scene contained. "What on earth are you doing here? And what in God's name are you wearing?" I stood my ground, calm and immovable. "Good evening, Amelia," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the sudden quiet around us. "I believe this is an open event. I bought a ticket." "You cannot be here," she seethed, grabbing my arm. Her fingers dug into my sleeve. "And you cannot wear those. That is sacrilegious. It's stolen valor. Take them off this instant." I looked down at her hand on my arm and then back up at her face. "Remove your hand from my person," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously low tone. She flinched and pulled her hand back as if she had been burned. "These are not stolen," I continued, my voice rising just enough for the circle of onlookers to hear every word clearly. "These are my husband's medals. I am his widow. I have every right to wear them." Mark finally caught up, his eyes wide with panic. "Mom? What's going on? What are you doing? Where did you find them?" Amelia demanded, her voice shrill. She was losing control. "I thought they were lost. I was looking everywhere for them." The lie was so bald, so pathetic, it was almost pitiable. But I felt no pity, only contempt. "That's a very interesting question, Amelia," I said, my voice ringing with clarity. "I didn't find them anywhere. I bought them." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the folded papers. I held up the invoice from the Harrison auction house. "I bought them 2 days ago. At auction. For $30,000. A collective gasp went through the small crowd that had gathered around us. Amelia's face crumpled. She looked utterly horrified. She knew what was coming. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Mark asked, his face ashen. He looked from the invoice in my hand to his wife's terrified face. The flimsy reality he had constructed for himself was beginning to shatter. "I'm talking about this, Mark," I said, my voice hard as steel. "Your wife stole your father's medals from my home. She lied to you.
She lied to me.
She put them up for auction to the highest bidder." "No," Amelia choked out, shaking her head frantically. "No, she's confused. She's grieving. She doesn't know what she's saying." It was her last, desperate defense. To paint me as a senile, hysterical old woman. But I was prepared. "I am not confused," I said, my voice booming with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "I am perfectly lucid. And I have proof." I unfolded the second piece of paper, the email from Mr. Davies. I held it up for all to see. "Here is the confirmation from the auction house. They were consigned by a Mrs. Amelia Thompson, your wife, Mark. Her name, her address." Mark took the paper from my hand. He read it, his face turning from disbelief to horror to a deep, gut-wrenching shame. He looked at his wife, truly looked at her, and saw the liar she was. But I was not finished. I turned my attention back to Amelia, who was now trembling, her eyes darting around at the shocked faces surrounding her. "And the money, Amelia," I said, delivering the final, killing blow. The $30,000 I paid to buy back my own husband's honor. I can't help but wonder if that's the major anonymous donation you've been bragging about securing for this gala. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. The co-chair of the gala, a formidable woman named Mrs. Albright, had pushed her way to the front of the crowd. Her face was a thundercloud. "Amelia," Mrs. Albright said, her voice dangerously calm. "Is this true?" Amelia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just stood there, exposed and humiliated, her gaudy gold dress suddenly looking cheap and ridiculous. All the lies, all the ambition, all the social climbing had led to this. Her public execution. Mark looked at the medals on my chest. He looked at the proof in his hands. He looked at the crumbling ruin of his wife's face. And in that moment, something inside him finally broke. He dropped the papers and turned to Amelia. "How could you?" he whispered, his voice choked with a pain so raw it was difficult to witness. "They were my father's. I had done what I came to do. I had reclaimed my husband's honor. I had exposed the truth." I looked at the wreckage of Amelia's night, at the stunned and judgmental faces of the people whose approval she so desperately craved. I felt no triumph, only a grim, weary satisfaction. I turned my back on them, on the whispers, on the scandal that was just beginning to erupt. With my head held high and the weight of my husband's medals over my heart, I walked out of the ballroom and did not look back. The night was cold and clear. I took a deep breath of the clean air. I was free. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. My phone began ringing the next morning and did not stop. The first call was from Margaret, who had already heard 3 different versions of a story from friends who had been at the gala. "They're calling you the vengeful widow," she said, a note of immense pride in her voice. "Apparently, Amelia had a complete breakdown after you left. Mrs. Albright publicly demanded her resignation from the gala committee right there on the spot. They had to escort her out." "Good," I said, the word feeling small but sufficient. "And Mark?" she asked gently. "I haven't heard from him," I said. That call came in the afternoon. It was Mark, his voice raw and broken. He wasn't calling from his home. He was calling from a hotel. "Mom," he said, and then he just sobbed. I listened patiently, letting him cry it all out. The tears of a man who had finally woken up from a long, self-imposed slumber. "I am so sorry," he finally managed to say.
"I'm so sorry."
"I should have listened to you. I should have believed you. I was weak. I let her control everything. I failed you. And I failed Dad." "Yes, you did," I said, not unkindly. The truth did not need sugarcoating. "But you know that now. The question is, what will you do about it?" "I've left her," he said, his voice gaining a sliver of resolve. "I packed a bag last night, and I left. I can't even look at her. What she did, it's unforgivable. It's monstrous." "It is," I agreed. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "Not right away. But I'm going to make this right. I'm going to file for divorce. And I'm going to pay you back every single cent of that $30,000, even if it takes me the rest of my life." "That's a start, Mark," I said. "It's a good start." We talked for a while longer. It was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. It felt like I was talking to my son again, the boy I had raised, not the hollow man he had become. The news of Amelia's disgrace spread through the community like wildfire. The Charity Foundation launched an internal investigation into her fundraising practices. Her name was Mud. The social ladder she had so desperately tried to climb had been kicked out from under her. She had craved the spotlight, and she had finally gotten it. She was the star of her own cautionary tale. A few days later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my granddaughter, Chloe. She was 22, a bright girl, but she had always been completely under her mother's thumb. "Grandma," she said, her voice small and trembling. Can I come see you?" She arrived an hour later, looking pale and lost. She sat on the edge of the sofa in my living room, twisting her hands in her lap. The rosewood box was back in its rightful place on the mantelpiece behind her. I'm so sorry, Grandma, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I knew what she was doing. I looked at her, my heart aching for this child caught in the crossfire. You knew. She nodded, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. I overheard her on the phone with the auction house. I asked her about it, and she told me you were losing your mind, that you had agreed to sell them and forgotten about it. She said we needed the money, because you were going to be a financial burden on us soon. She said a lot of things. And you believed her? I asked softly. No, she whispered, looking up at me, her eyes filled with shame. Not really. But I was scared of her.
You know how she is.
I was scared to tell you, scared to tell Dad. I didn't know what to do. So I did nothing. And that's just as bad. Yes, it is, I said gently. Silence in the face of a lie is a lie itself. She broke down then, sobbing with the guilt she had been carrying. I went and sat next to her, and I put my arm around her. She was just a child, manipulated and intimidated by a domineering mother. Her crime was cowardice, not malice. I forgive you, Chloe, I said, and I meant it.
But you have to learn from this.
You have to learn to find your own voice. You cannot let bullies, even if they are your own mother, silence what you know to be right. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there for a long time, two survivors of Amelia's reign of terror. Our relationship would need time to heal, but for the first time, I felt like it could. In the weeks that followed, a new quiet settled over my house. But it was a different kind of quiet. It was not the heavy, lonely silence of grief. It was the calm, peaceful silence of a battle won, of order restored. Mark continued with the divorce proceedings. Amelia, I heard, had moved out of the city to live with her sister, her reputation in tatters. I never got the $30,000 back from Mark, and I never asked for it. The look on Amelia's face at that gala was payment enough. I had bought back my husband's medals, but I had also bought back my son. I would sit in my living room in the evenings, the lights low, and look at the rosewood box on the mantel. It was more than just a box of medals. It was a symbol of honor, of memory, of a love that even death could not diminish. Amelia had tried to turn that honor into cash, that memory into a stepping stone for her own ambition. But she had failed. She had underestimated the power of a promise. She had underestimated the love of a wife. She finally learned what Arthur and I had known all along. Some things are not for sale. Some things are worth fighting for. And some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed.